So I see that it's 10 o'clock. I would say good morning, everyone. On behalf of EURANIMI and Dubrink, of course, we'd like to give you a very warm welcome to today's webinar on CBAM. We're, of course, very happy that you could join us. Judging by the registration, it's clear that CBAM is high on everyone's agenda. We've got over 130 registrations today. Not everyone has joined us yet, but they will soon do. From nearly 100 different importers of stainless steel or aluminium across 22 European countries. And that's a very big slice of the EU imports right here in this virtual room. And it shows just how relevant and urgent CBAM has become for all of us. A special thank you to Marcel Duits and Jan-Joost Brinker, the brains behind Dubrink. Not only do they know CBAM inside and out, they've also created tools that help you save time. And let's be honest, in this business, time is money, or at least fewer headaches. So we are very happy to have them walk us through today's session. Before we get started, if you agree to set this next slide, yes. Thank you. Just a little compliance reminder. You know exactly what you can say and what you cannot say. At this point in time, the microphones are set off, but of course you will have the chance and the opportunity to ask questions. We're among peers today, so we know that we cannot say everything, but thank you in advance for keeping the discussion informative and fully compliant. Before we go to the next step, I'll hand over to Jan-Joost, who will walk us through to a few practical points, including how to ask questions, vote in the live poll, activate subtitles, and so on. Jan-Joost, the floor is yours now.
All right. Hello, everyone. So quick house rules, I guess, or some housekeeping about the duration. A little bit of EURANIMI at the beginning. I will then host today's session. I hope to get through it in 25 to 30 minutes because we have a lot of questions that came in prior. We actually have a built-in question and answers feature. You can access that. I realized that it has changed slightly. It's not the triangle, square, and circle as in the icon. It's actually the 9 dots that you, or is it 9? Yes, 9 dots that you see in the bottom right corner of your screen. If you press that, you see an option called polls or any of the translated options. And based on that, you will see these polls and you can basically choose your answer. We also use Q&A options. So in the same exact way as you here choose polls, there is Q&A. If you have a question for us, simply click on Q&A. And then in the next screen, you can ask your question. If you see a question come up, you can use the question feature to raise it here. If your existing question is already there, please use this little thumbs up icon just to upvote it. We will have a lot of people here, almost 100 at the moment. So it will help us keep things a little bit manageable, so to speak. We also have an international audience today, and I can imagine that English is not your first language. It's also not mine. You can actually turn on subtitles for this webinar. It's fully in real time. If you press the button that says CC, it will turn on subtitles, and then you actually have the option even to switch between live captions as well as translated captions, giving you access to translated subtitles in real time, and you can use the cogwheel purple icon to actually change the language to whatever you prefer. It should work quite well as long as I speak clearly enough, which I will try to do. That being said, it is AI and it is work in progress, so keep that in mind. I think that's it from the housekeeping side. Marcel, if you'd be so kind to please show the rest.
Thank you. So I'll take over from here. Before we dive into the technical side, just a quick word for those who don't know EURANIMI yet. We're the European Association of Mill Independent Importers and Distributors of Stainless Steel and Aluminium. Today, we represent around 300 distribution sites across 25 European countries, and depending on the product, up to half of all EU imports in our sector. So not only the imports by distributors, but also by producers and industrial users. What do we actually do? Well, first, we keep our members informed about all the changes in EU rules that can impact their imports, whether it's safeguard measure, anti-dumping and countervailing duties, circumvention, tariffs, EU sanctions, and now CBAM. These rules, they change constantly. And when you find out too late, it can start costing real money. So what do? We very closely monitor the upcoming EU legislation. We analyze and summarize what matters, translate the legal maze of mumbo jumbo into common people's language, and provide clear, practical, and complete updates to our members. And we move fast. Second, we also defend the interests of importers in Brussels, especially when European Commission rewrites the import rules that govern our products. In that process, we act with the Commission as a sort of counterweight to the powerful lobbies of European producers. And third, when needed, we take legal action. That includes bringing cases before the European Court of Justice, particularly when there is a collective risk to the sector and significant financial stakes. So in one sentence, membership costs very little, typically just 1,500 euro per year, but it helps save a great deal: time, stress, uncertainty, duties, and cost. So if you're not a member yet and this sounds helpful or simply worth supporting, don't hesitate to reach out. You're welcome to join our international association, whether openly or even anonymously. We'd be happy to tell you more. So, CBAM will enter into full effect on the 1st of January 2026, and that's no longer far away. But as of today, a lot of key elements are still missing. We don't know yet the benchmark values by product, the definitive default values, the average ETS price for 2026 that CBAM will be based on, and maybe most importantly, the verification rules that are still not ready. Now, the EU plans to rely on accredited bodies to verify emission data from the producers, but today the legal framework for those verifiers are not in place and won't be in place before the end of this year. And yet, CBAM applies from day one on the 1st of January 2026 across a huge range of sectors: that's steel, aluminium, electricity, cement, fertilizers, and hydrogen. So that means tens of thousands of producers worldwide will fall under CBAM, and it's simply unrealistic to expect that all their data to be verified on time. So what happens? Importers remain fully liable from the 1st of January 2026 for emissions data that they didn't produce, can't verify, and often can't control. So we ask our lawyers at Van Baalen Bellis whether the Commission could be legally forced to publish key info earlier under the EU principle of good administration. And their answer is no. We don't have solid legal grounds to sue the Commission for being late, even if your goods have already been ordered, maybe even shipped, by the time the rules are clarified. So like it or not, the bottom line is simple: we have to deal with this uncertainty. Now, at EURANIMI, we haven't just sat back and waited. On the 12th of May, we submitted a formal proposal to DG TaxUD, asking the Commission to publish before the summer holidays temporary benchmark and default values, just for 2026. We also propose to set the temporary benchmark slightly above its expected final value and set the 2026 temporary default value a little below its future level. That's a simple idea, but it's powerful. The system remains fair, the core principles of CBAM stay intact, but the impact on the market is less brutal, especially for the downstream manufacturing industry and the end users, who will ultimately bear the cost. Most importantly, it gives importers a real number to work with, something you can show, plan around, and start including in your price offers. If you'd like to deep dive into the details of our proposal, it's fully available on our website. So, while we wait for the Commission to decide and communicate, one thing is already clear. We must start acting now. From what we already know and what we'll show you today, CBAM will bring real costs starting January 2026. And unless the market is prepared, those costs will fall straight on the shoulders of the importer. But there is a simple truth. When people know what's coming, they can accept it. That's why we are encouraging all importers, all of you in this room, to start communicating about CBAM openly, clearly, and already this year. A good way to do that? Add a CBAM surcharge line in your price offers and invoices, just like it's already done for the alloy surcharge. Even if it shows 0 for today, for now, it sends a signal. This cost is coming, it is real, and we are being transparent about it. And this is not just theory. As an example, when Belgium introduced the highway toll for trucks back in 2026, the Belgian distributors started mentioning it on their offers and in their invoices 6 months in advance. And it worked. Clients understood, the market adapted, and the surcharge became standard practice. To this day, it's still there. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about coordination or setting pricing strategies. Each company makes its own calculation and takes its own decisions. But one thing is sure, if importers stay silent, they'll end up paying CBAM alone. If they explain things and others, the other distributors, all of you in the room, do the same, confidence builds, and CBAM becomes what it was meant to be, a fair, green policy, and not just another penalty on importers. So don't wait for 2026. Don't wait for others. Start now. Build trust and prepare the market. So with that in mind, our goal today is to help you turn CBAM from something vague and intimidating into something concrete, manageable, and proactive. Yes, CBAM is going to bring new costs, but if you understand them and explain them early, you can keep control on your business and even gain the trust of your clients in the process. With that, I'll now hand things over to Marcel and Jan Joost from Dubrink. Gentlemen, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
All right, and we're back. Please let me know if my screen is, it should be visible, I guess. Yeah, perfect.
That's
good. So nice to meet you all. First things first, my name is Jan Joost Dubrink. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Dubrink. I deal with all technical things, a little bit of operational, but mostly the technical things of CBAM. We are a CBAM company. We started about 2 years ago to make CBAM a little bit more manageable. Originally, that started, of course, from the administrative side, but it has soon evolved into also making sure that the financial side is covered, because CBAM is not just the administrative burden, as you know it, but it also has a significant cost. We provide, obviously, consulting services, education, which is part of this webinar series, and we have also a best-in-class platform. Now, the platform itself has a bunch of features. You can read all about that on our website. Essentially, what you need to know is that it's available in 27 languages. That makes it very easy for the supply chain to communicate with one another. And it works for you. If you are a direct importer, you add your imports, you literally connect your suppliers to that, and they provide the data. If that is in Excel format, if that is in a PDF report, or if that is, you know, manually calculated within our calculation side, the calculation side of our platform, that's up to the supplier. But we really try to give them as many different ways to provide this data, and that shows, because people really like to at least respond higher than what we see across the market. So we're very happy with that. And then essentially at the end, we generate what's called a one-click declaration. You take that declaration from our platform, you upload it to the European Commission, and with that declaration, you essentially do everything that you previously may have done manually. And on top of that, we provide you things like analytics and forecasting features to give you access into your future cost, and as well as your current cost, and where do they come from. Then today's briefing. Before I do that, I do apologize. I have been a little bit under the weather the last few days, so you may hear a slight coarse voice, or I may mute myself for a brief moment just to cough, but that's all. It's all good. I'm alive and happy to be here. Just bear with me, please. About today's briefing, I'd like to start off with some of the wrong assumptions that we hear in the market a lot, surprisingly. Then I want to dive into risks, briefly touch upon authorized declarants, the data collection aspects, then how much CBAM will cost you. I have some update regarding the CBAM benchmarks, and then we will look at some of the responses to the questions that we will ask you in the next section. And then we're going to jump straight into Q&A, because there have been a lot of questions up front, and I just want to get through that because I think it's the most valuable thing. Earlier, I saw also somebody raising their hand. If you actually have a question, please use the 9 dots at the bottom right corner to open up the activities panel, click on Q&A and answer your question, write your question there. We will see it and we will answer it as soon as we can, because we are not letting let people turn their mics on just for a moment. We'll do that towards the end if you want to have it back and forth. Perfect. So the first question I would like to ask you, and I'd like to ask Marcel to publish that, is how big of an impact you expect CBAM to have on your business. Yeah, I know that a lot of you will import material from outside of Europe, but maybe some of that will come from countries that are likely to have an ETS, or that will be somehow less impacted by CBAM. So I would very much like to see what kind of response you guys give to this question. And I will just use this time to breathe. And I think it's a good idea to open just for the sake of time. And then we will just proceed. Perfect. Okay, so first, a couple of things is wrong assumptions about CBAM. This one really surprises me. So first thing I hear a lot, and we're talking all across the supply chain, importers saying that, consultants saying that worryingly, and even customs representatives. I will only pay 2.5% tax for my CBAM imports. You could not be more wrong. I will show you exactly where the 2.5% confusion comes from in just a second. I can assure you that this is wrong, and the actual CBAM charge is a lot higher. Just keep in mind, this is not correct. It has been postponed to 2027. That is also not true, because the payments for CBAM will take place in 2027 for the very first time. However, you will start paying for every import that crosses the border from January 1st onward of 2026. So it's now, let's say, give or take a few days, we're almost halfway, minus 1 month. So we're like 7 months away from 2026, and CBAM in at that point. Then the omnibus package canceled CBAM. Now CSRD or CSDDD was cut severely. 99.9% of the market was cut. CBAM, they're saying 90% of companies were cut out. Is that true? Yeah, surely from the smaller side, but not when you're looking at the volume of imports. Of course, there's all the big players are left, including many of you. So definitely not. Update on the omnibus package. There was a vote in the European Parliament. It did pass. So we're not expecting to see a lot of top-down changes. Just translating that into national law may bring about some small, nuances, but pretty much what's currently in the omnibus package as far as CBAM is concerned, of course, because I can't attest to the rest, that's going to happen the way it's there. Then I'm declaring CBAM now. I will be ready for the definitive period. That's not true. There are some very serious things that you have to do, and you have to do them right. You have to do them timely before you can actually start importing during the definitive period. Perfect. So then, this is the last one, and that is that your supplier is responsible for the data they provide. They're responsible for the material they provide to you, but as far as data is concerned, you are declaring that data to be truthful. You take full responsibility over that data. If you don't want to do that, there are solutions. We can talk about that in a moment. But ultimately, data that you declare is yours to take the responsibility from. Great. Then the next thing is to talk about risks. Now, risks is a very important topic in CBAM, but there is an additional dimension that we need to look at, because all risks are relative. And the factor that determines how relative and how important the risks are is time. So we need to look at CBAM and risks in particular along a timeline. And I have the next few years here lined up. Just for good measure, we are here. So this is 2025. We are almost halfway 2025. And that's what we're dealing with so far. What you need to know is the first and biggest risk that I see so far is a milestone that starts to come into play 2026, January 1st, straight off the bat. And that's the fact that you can only import materials as an authorized declarant in January 1st. That means that you have to become an authorized declarant. So let's first have a look at that and figure out what's involved and what the risks are with the authorized declarant status. So what you need to know that this is a formal request procedure. You log in, you file all the data about your company, about your import behavior, trends, and so on. And then there is a risk assessment. This takes things into consideration. Think about import volume, think about your financials, think about your current track record, meaning that have you been a CBAM declarant so far? Have you done all your declarations during the transitional period? That is taken into account because it shows that you have the operational capacity to do so. It shows that you can actually do it on time, and it sets the stage for what's coming next during the definitive period. There's also a timeline here, and that's one of the risks. There's 120 days to evaluate this decision. This risk management, risk assessment process takes 120 days. That's in itself quite lengthy, but actually if you submit before June 15th, so you're trying to be proactive, it actually is going to harm you, because in that case you have the national competent authorities have 180 days to evaluate your application. So keep those two things in mind. Then what's quite important here is a forecast on import quantities. You are going to have to ask for an authorization, whether that is 10,000 tons or 15,000 tons is not really relevant. Yeah, you ask for whatever you think you're going to need, but they're going to ask you for financial guarantees. So you either have to prove liquidity, or prove that you have bank guarantees to compensate for the emissions embedded within the product and, of course, the costs associated with that. These forecasts will become very important because if you do not know what you're going to import in 2026 October yet, keep that in mind because you will ask for the authorization for the entire year. And then we have this question, what if the authorized quantity is exceeded? So you ask for an authorization of 10,000 tons, and in, let's say, halfway through the year, 2026, a big deal comes in and they ask you for an additional 10,000 tons. Can you actually do that? Well, currently, it seems that you would have to ask for an exception or at least an amendment of your allocated quota. And I use these terms loosely. Note the quotes, the air quotes I use on camera, because it's obviously not a quota, but it is definitely something that has a restriction. It is tied to the 99.9% of emissions that the European Commission wants to capture and eventually reduce. And I definitely think that it is a risk to keep in mind. Also, remember, if you are not authorized, there will be no imports. Your imports will be stopped at the border. I was actually on the phone briefly before this with one of our customs clients, trying to figure out like what options would you have. For the moment, there's not an awful lot known about it. The CBAM certificates themselves are not tradable, so we are assuming that it will be very difficult to say, okay, I am not authorized, but my colleague in, this, let's say your EURANIMI colleague might have the authorization. Keep in mind that if this does happen, your imports will count against their quota, and that can get a little bit messy. And again, I use the term quota loosely here. It's not a real quota, but there is a threshold that has been pre-authorized. Additional authorization might be necessary. Good. Let me. Okay, I also noticed that we have a floating box on screen. That was just part of the animation that didn't get put into the group. So first deadline here for you guys to know is June 15th, 2025. The reason I don't put it earlier is because the NCA has a longer time to respond. Just do it as soon as possible after June 15th, and then you mitigate one of these risks. Then what's important to know, and here you see why the boxes were there. What's important to know, once you have this authorized declarant status, you can, let's say, freely import goods all throughout 2026. And then the first major milestone that's really going to make everything, come alive is the 2027 declaration. So this is where you finally say, okay, throughout 2026, I have imported a bunch of stuff. These are the dates, these are the HS codes, country of origin, and these are the emissions embedded in those goods. This is the latest date. Probably you will be able to submit that before, but just keep in mind that this is roughly how we're seeing it go. So that's when all of the data that you collect on 2026 will have to be reported. Let's talk about that data collection aspect then. So for your sector, that's what the asterisk indicates, iron and steel, aluminium, that's only direct emissions during the definitive period, have embedded emissions, and you will declare those. You will declare those on the installation level, and you are responsible for the data that you submit. What's important is also that it's about the customs clearance date. If you order products and the invoice date is in 2025, or the invoice date will even be after the fact, in 2027, nobody cares. It's the date that the goods clear customs in Europe. And in particular, it's not just when they clear customs, it's when the goods enter free release in Europe. So if you import goods, they end up in warehousing for a couple of months, and only afterwards end up in free release. This is where things start to matter. This is where CBAM comes in. Then we are talking about actual emissions that must be verified before they can be used. The problem with that is, of course, that these criteria have not yet been established. Now, if you ask me, does that mean that we will not have verification, that we will not have actual emissions as part of CBAM? I strongly believe we will. Sorry, I'm going to jump back for the simple reason that if you look at where we are today, mid-2025, and you look at where the actual declaration has to take place, August 31st, that's almost 2 years from now. So between now and then, a lot of things can happen. They can still take a year, let's say half a year, to finalize this legislation about the drafts, and then another half a year to slowly roll it out. Do I believe all emissions will be verified? Of course not. I think it will be a first come, first served basis. There will be a limited amount of verifiers capable of doing that. Whoever is willing to pay the premium to go to these companies will have their emissions verified, and everybody else will use default values as a fallback. That's unfortunately how it's going to be, I think. Also, we as Dubrink are in close contact with top verification companies. Think about LRQA, think about SGS, and even Bureau Veritas. They're actually, we're in really close contact with them because they're doing our ISO 27001 audits. But they are truly ramping up their capacity in these areas. So as soon as the legislation comes out, I'm pretty sure that you're going to see these companies advertise that. So just keep this in mind. Then we do have this as something that I would like to point out, guys, that the default values may be used punitively, so as a punishment. And the text underneath that is literally from the legislation, I believe, or Q&A document, that the default values are intended to be higher and are less favorable for importers than if you provide calculations using actual data. So keep that in mind because it leaves the door open to what is yet to come. Great. Then as we proceed, the deadline here, we talked about that. We talked about the goods, and then we know the declaration. But what's still very important to keep in mind is the fact that these goods will have to be purchased in 2025, probably, if they're going to arrive in Q1 2026. And then eventually you'll have to buy certificates starting February 1st, 2027. So just because you are only declaring in 2027 does not mean that you will not have to pay for the goods that arrive. So you're going to have to factor in these costs. That then obviously brings us to the question about the costs. But before we jump into the costs, I would like to ask you guys to rate your level of preparedness to face CBAM risks, and I would love to hear your opinion on that.
In the poll, right? Yeah, Joost.
Oh, yes, sorry, that's in the poll. I thought that was clear. All right, as we proceed, then I will discuss polls at the very end, as we are a little bit pressed for time and we have a lot to cover, so let's keep on. So the question is, of course, how much will CBAM cost? This is the formula. I apologize, it's a little bit grainy. I took this screenshot from the official Q&A document. It's a very complicated formula, unnecessarily complicated in my opinion. Then there is a part that is not relevant today because that's about carbon taxes paid elsewhere. That's not applicable today. And that it only gives you the number of certificates. It doesn't actually give you the cost. So let's just jump into a slightly easier example of the same formula. Your products have embedded emissions expressed in tons CO2 per ton. And then there is a second variable that we need to discuss, which is the benchmark. And we always describe the benchmark to our customers as it's basically the minimum amount of CO2 embedded in a product realistically if you were to produce that with the cleanest tech available today. Now, that's obviously subject to a couple of variations, like we're not talking about logical progression of technology. Brand new technologies may slash benchmark values in half over time, but historically, it is linear development that we're talking about. So a few percent a year, it might adjust, but once that value is set, it won't modify that much. Then there's a CBAM factor. So the CBAM factor is, sorry, I see a couple of questions come in, but I will leave that till the very end. The CBAM factor, it's basically the percentage of CBAM that will come into like the degree to which CBAM will affect you, more or less, I guess. And this is important because you are not applying the CBAM factor to the emissions that are in your product. You apply this to the benchmark, and then you multiply the two and then subtract them from one another. And then you multiply it with the ETS price. Now, that sounds like a whole bunch of math. There's actually a science behind what the values mean. All you need to know for now to make it really tangible is that if you take an emission of 2.5 tons of CO2 per metric ton, and we have a benchmark of 1.5, and then someone asks, I will do that now because it was about the previous slide. Somebody asked me about the payments, that they didn't get what I meant with the payments part. Allow me to jump back here. I don't get what you mean with the payment. You will have the ability to purchase CBAM certificates starting February 1st. You will then have to surrender these certificates, hand them over to the government, to the European Union Commission, or national competent authorities, to be correct, on August 31st. So that's what I mean with payment. You just buy them from that moment onward. Why not sooner? I just think their infrastructure is not ready. That's the simple answer. Okay, so CBAM factor, it's a fixed percentage. It's going to be 97.5% all throughout 2026. So we can fill that out as a variable. That's not changing. We have embedded emissions of 2.5. We have a benchmark of, let's say, 1.5. Then we have the CBAM factor, and then we have the ETS price of, in this case, 85. If we do this math and we use the brackets correctly, it works out to be 88.19 euro per metric ton. Now, what is important to understand is that over time, the CBAM factor will go down. In 2034, 35, I don't remember exactly, it will be 0%. That means that between the brackets, you will multiply with 0. If you multiply with 0, that means that everything between the brackets will be 0, meaning that you cannot subtract anything from the 2.5 tons, meaning that you would pay the full 2.5 tons of emissions against the price. That works out to 212.50 euro per metric ton. Keep in mind that EUA price is also still fluctuating. This morning I took the screenshot, but you can see this is developing quite rapidly. To make it tangible, let's quickly do 1 or 2 CN codes just to show you guys. I will search for stainless. If we take stainless steel ingots, let's take stainless. Let's take this. This is a stainless steel product with a certain thickness. If we enter that into the equation and we click forecast, you will see that it will work out to about 52 euro per ton starting in 2026. But you can actually step through that, and as you can see, it will go up quite rapidly, and that's due to the benchmark not being able to be, well, it's because the benchmark will eventually go down because you're multiplying with a number that it's closer to 0. If we say 10,000 tons here, just for the guys that they import lots of volume, we're talking about 2 million euro in 2030. Okay, only €500,000 in 2026. But just keep in mind, this is massive. This is really a lot of money, and a lot of people forget about that. If you're curious about what emissions I'm using for that, we're using the default values at the moment. If I lower that, let's say 2, because that's the actual emission that I got, let's assume it will be verified. You are only talking about a minuscule difference in comparison to, in this case, the default values, and that's because it's only one of the variables, and there is many variables to be considered.
And Joost?
Yes.
Someone asked, when you write embedded emissions, do we talk about direct plus indirect or direct emissions only? Might be good to explain.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are talking about, for your sector, iron and steel, aluminium, basically everything except cement and fertilizers. We are talking direct emissions only. So it will basically be combustion, process emissions, mass balance. That's it. I believe it's fertilizers, cement, and maybe hydrogen. It is both indirect and direct, but that's for you. Then that brings us to the topic about the benchmarks, because that's obviously a big topic. It's the variable that is missing from this equation that we don't know, right? The big unknown. Actually, I have some news for you guys because the International Association for the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism has published a set of estimated benchmarks for 2026. It uses the ETS, known ETS data. It uses forecasting, looking at the technological advancements, and then it applies, let's say, a factor of modification here and there to just figure out what these benchmarks are likely to be. They provide best and worst case scenarios, so an upper and a lower limit, if you may. And well, they've been published just yesterday across all categories. And if you are, you can purchase them through EURANIMI actually. And if you are a non-member, the benchmarks go for €700, but all EURANIMI members get a 50% discount on that, which would make it only €350 to get access to 2 preliminary benchmarks per HS code or CN code, which will give you the ability to say worst case scenario, best case scenario when purchasing your goods. Then, to sum up, we have 3 deadlines I would like you guys to watch out for. First, June 15th, right? Make sure that you start applying to become an authorized declarant. Then keep in mind that you will have to file the final declaration August 31st, but containing all information of 2026, and that you will have to start paying for your certificates. You buy the certificates, and maybe this is a wrong choice of words, for which I apologize. Purchasing of the certificates starts on the 1st of February. Then finishing up, before we jump into the Q&A, it's not over. It's just looking forward at what we might expect. So this is what's happening at the moment. There's an expansion of CBAM, at least in the preliminary stages, vertically, so more finished goods and precursors. We're also talking expansion horizontally, so additional sectors. That also covered finished goods, of course. That also covers things like ceramics, glass, all under consideration. So nothing fixed here. I just want to show you where this is going. And they're currently assessing emissions from transport services as well, because of course that is part of the emissions in your product, unfortunately. There's a survey underway, so this is early. This is from a late meeting with the European Commission. This is about a downstream product, but you can see how far this goes, because a laundry machine, which is what is declared at customs, is then actually broken down into CBAM goods and non-CBAM goods, showing that they're really trying to get the downstream products eventually in scope as well. And this is actually based on weight. So 60% of that is metal, and then there's a bit of cement, and etc. So you can really see that they're starting to put the pieces together on more complex CBAM rules. And I do expect that maybe before the end of the year to at least be announced. So get ready for that. And then
they are thinking of this, right? So it was discussed. It's not the fact that this is going to happen, but the fact that they are looking into laundry machines means you have to break down the whole machine. Means that they are more looking into pushing this forward than actually pushing it backwards.
Yeah, and maybe also what the reason that I bring this up, right, is on one hand we're talking about the fact that it is exploratory and we're doing a survey, but then we see that in certain timelines that some of these studies have already been well underway for 12, 14 months. So, it's way past just, hey guys, question. No, it's actually bringing all the stakeholders to the table. What do you have to say? What do you think? So important to say. And then probably my last note is about, of course, China-US trade wars that have unleashed in recent months. This is not a political topic. I just want to bring up that as the Chinese have been severely impacted by the US tariffs, they're looking for different markets to sell their products to. One of the things that the EU does not want is their entire sustainability agenda to be undermined by having all the Chinese companies that can't sell in the US because it's too expensive due to tariffs move to the EU and then dump their products on the market, so to speak. So just keep in mind that this is why sustainability, at least CBAM, is a really, really important vehicle, because it's one of the very few WTO approved mechanisms that would allow them to keep, some sort of control over their domestic market. Let me put it like this.
Yeah, and Joost, I think we also include this because we want to show that there's a certain mindset, right? We see some industries like the fastener industry where still a lot of companies actually tell us that CBAM might still go away, and it's becoming quite risky to keep on thinking like that. What we see is that the push is actually moving forward, meaning that they would implement only more scope expansions and extensions than actually going backwards.
Yeah, and I would like to ask you to launch the last poll, please. Just before we dive into the Q&A, I would very much like to ask you just to rate today's briefing so we have a good understanding of if it was of value to you. And then as we proceed, I will start going through the questions and answers because we have quite a few. If you would like to get in touch with Dubrink, I will show this slide towards the end as well. Just visit our website is always the easiest way to get in touch, of course.